Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
The world we live in is itself a good place created by God. He sent His Son to redeem it. But on the other hand, it is also a place where the demons roam, where evil is real, where institutions are shot full of selfishness, and where accumulated guilt over the years gets embedded in our structures and systems and all of the social institutions in which we live. And so, therefore, we are creatures, in summary, who are threatened by sin and guilt, as well as being having an essential goodness as created by God.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Father Roland Calvert, Associate Pastor at Pius X Parish in Toledo. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of spiritual growth and renunciation. Here's Father Bacik.
Roland, I would like to talk a little bit about the general theme of the spiritual life and the role that renunciation or mortification has in the spiritual life. For some people, that would relate to the whole question of Lent and how they manage the Lenten season, what kind of penances they introduce into their lives. And for other people who don't take Lent as a major way of growth, that it relates as well to the question of what role does discipline have in my life? What role does mortification generally have as I try to move towards greater maturity in life? So are you game for a little discussion on that?
Yes, I would be very willing.
Okay, let me start by saying something about us humans that seems important in this context, and that is we humans are created by God. There's an essential goodness about us, for sure. The whole of creation is good as it comes from God's hands. And we know within ourselves the impulse to do good and the moments of enlightenment and the altruistic spirit that can take us over at times. But we also know another side to our existence. That other side often comes under the heading of temptation or sin. We also know the truth of what Paul said, that I don't do the things that I know I should do. And I do things that I know I shouldn't. We have that impulse within us to be destructive, to live in self-contradiction, to go against our ideals. We know the temptations of the world. The world we live in is itself a good place created by God. He sent His Son to redeem it. But on the other hand, it is also a place where the demons roam, where evil is real, where institutions are shot full of selfishness, and where accumulated guilt over the years gets embedded in our structures and systems and all of the social institutions in which we live. And so, therefore, we are creatures, in summary, who are threatened by sin and guilt, as well as being having an essential goodness as created by God. And I think that sets up for us some sense of this idea of mortification and renunciation. It perhaps puts a slant on our Lenten practices. It suggests, I suppose, that part of a full spiritual life always needs to have a bit of mortification, of giving up and renunciation.
Well, the quotation that you used from St. Paul is one of my favorites. He's my patron saint, and I don't admire everything in Paul, to be honest, but that particular quote rings such a bell in me. He says, the things I try to do, that's what I don't do. And then what I don't want to do, I find myself doing. And all of us experience that strange, mysterious quality that at times we're not who we ought to be, and we know it. And if we're honest, we use the word sin. That's tended to disappear a little bit from the vocabulary, and I think Dr. Carl Menninger and other people have commented on it. It's not good. It's not good even from the viewpoint of mental health, that at times we ought to say, what I'm doing is wrong. And the word sinful can be a very accurate way to describe what I'm doing. And then to deal with it and say, I've got to be better. I've got to try to do something with my life to change that.
Yeah, I guess one way we experience that is as a gap between our ideals and our performance. Sort of the common human situation, have high expectations for ourselves and for others, to get up in the morning and to think, today I'm not going to gossip, I'm going to keep my temper under control, there won't be any excesses in my life, I'm going to be a sensitive person today, I'm do my job well, put in the hours as I'm supposed to, and be good to my family and so on. I mean, I think a lot of people feel that at the beginning of the day, or at the beginning of a week, or at the beginning of the Lenten season. You know, that's how I would like to be. There sort of is a common ideal, I think, that many of us share, at least, out of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And yet we go to bed at night and say, I disappointed myself in many ways. The anger came out. The mother says, I yelled at the children when I didn't want to. I was all primed. I was going to bite my tongue today. No matter what, I'm not going to yell at those kids. I'm going to be positive. And what happens? The words come tumbling out, and the patience is lost. The man goes to work and says, you know, I'm going to really do a good job today. I am going to put in my full time and use my talents to the best. And he finds himself daydreaming in the middle of the day and doesn't get as much done as he would like to get done. All, you know, ways in which we know that that gap that we're talking about.
Well, as you were saying that, I thought of a woman in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who was in a dialogue group that I work with. And it was a lot of general topics, but very often war and peace was something we dealt with. And it became clear in her comments, and she was an articulate, really gifted person, that she was a pacifist and felt very strongly about that. And she came to me on one occasion, I remember, privately. She had 6 children, as I remember, and she says, you know, I speak about being a pacifist, but at times I want to kill in the family. I mean, I am so angry and frustrated, and she was very upset by that situation. I think I said something to the effect, welcome to the human race, or whatever, because that's in here. I mean, a true pacifist has to deal with the potentiality of killing. There are demons in all of us. And I think that the demons come out for me mostly in traffic. I am so amazed how I lose my equanimity over relatively small things, you know, and it seems like every moron that exists in the world is on the road when I'm there. And of course it's my own attitude. It's a lot. I'm uncomfortable, I guess, with mechanical things like cars. They befuddle me. And once you get into traffic and that rat race quality and rush, I am worried really a little at my attitude. And I think I need to look at that and say, why do I get upset?
I think, Roland, what you should do is go to New York City and drive there for about a month.
Yes.
And drive around there, and you see an odd attitude on the part of the drivers there. They have learned a great deal of patience. I used to live in New York City, and that was always interesting to me. Really, they were a more resigned group than, and as long as you drove with some verve and some initiative, they didn't care.
Oh, the word's aggressive, yes.
Yes, right. If you were assertive in your driving, then you fit right in. But that was interesting. Anyway, if you go to New York City, do that for a month, I think that you'll probably
Well, I am going to New York City. I'll be there Easter week, but I am not going to take your advice.
You're not going to do that.
No.
Well, I was thinking, too, as you're speaking personally, that part of our problem as clergy, and I suppose any people who are in the professions in a way, is the great expectations that are put upon us, so that when we start out our day, there's a lot of people expecting us to work miracles for them and do good and to have us on a pedestal and so on. And perhaps that's sort of an added burden as one assesses one's life. The gap between what is expected of one and one's actual performance perhaps is greater in that kind of situation. And I think perhaps mothers feel that a lot. At least I talk to mothers who sense that. I mean, there's this high ideal of motherhood and how people are supposed to live up to this, and it becomes a difficult thing to do.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure of that. Probably what Gandhi said, we talked about on a previous program, would be very helpful, that you do what you have to do, you do it as well as you can, and you don't worry about success, and you also don't fear failure. Now, that's not easy to do, because we are living in a success-oriented culture, and there's a lot of stress put on that. And stress is a good word, because that's what it produces. Mm-hmm. You have to go out and you yourself produce. And there's a real pressure. I mean, I'm sure you feel it as you run around taping these programs and as you're gone down to the Trinity Church this afternoon and give a talk. And I think every priest, and I'm sure every layperson also, experiences that same thing. And somehow to get peace of mind and equanimity in the midst of that rat race, that's what we're seeking.
Yes, I think, Roland, that here we get back to that idea that we are the people threatened by sin and guilt, and what that suggests to us in terms of how to deal with it. I think there's a lot of approaches to that. One is to remind ourselves, I think, that indeed renunciation is a part of life. That, as the Greeks said, that all of life is a preparation for death. And all of the little mortifications one is doing throughout life is sort of getting ready for that supreme letting go, the freest moment we have when we're called upon to hand our whole being over to the gracious mystery in charge of our lives. That suggests this whole idea of mortification and renunciation, of voluntarily giving things up. We live in this society of abundance. We have so much. We have affluence. We never really know from the inside what it means to be hurting the way two-thirds of the world is, two-thirds of the world that is hungry and not properly nourished, people who are not clothed properly and have no homes. Those of us who live the middle-class life in the United States simply can't know that in any way, and yet it seems important somehow to deal with the fact that we have this great affluence and to do something to simplify attitudes or outlooks or lifestyle. Again, that might suggest some giving up of things in our lives, maybe voluntarily not eating as much, fasting during Lent, not eating certain kinds of foods. That probably would be a good thing for many Americans to do, to be much more conscious of diet and of simplifying in that area of life. I'm reminded here of Gandhi, and I think he could come up in our discussion a lot as we go along, but he was so careful about his diet and felt so strongly that it was connected in with effective living. He had this theory that there were certain things you shouldn't eat or drink in order to keep yourself under control. He was a vegetarian throughout almost all of his life. He broke that a few times. The example that's coming to my mind of his strictness about food is when one of his sons was dying, and the doctors were insisting that he have broth, that he needed that for strength, and Gandhi refused to let them give this broth to his son because he felt so strongly about this dietary matter.
Yes. One of the stories that comes to mind in an earlier program, we talked about his wife and the fact that Gandhi had troubles in his marriage, which is undeniable. But toward the end of it, he had made a lot of progress in treating Kasturbai in a much more human way. And Louis Fisher, in his biography, has a story which is very lovely, that toward the end, his wife was drinking coffee and tea and things with caffeine in it, and he objected to that. And she changed her diet in a lot of ways, but she said, Mohandas, I am not going to give up tea. That's it. And toward the end of his life, he reconciled himself to her decision and made the cup of tea for her, and he would bring it when it was time for the tea. And it seems to me that that suggests not only the deprivation aspect, but also charity and flexibility, that's the aim, to try to be tolerant of other people and the fact that they're different.
Mm-hmm. So that it would be important to see that the giving up of things has to do with growth in the spiritual life and ultimately for charity. So that if somebody is going to be giving up food and all day long they feel themselves in a slow burn and much grouchier than usual and ready to strike out at people because they have given up food, then we've probably got a problem here, and it may not be a wise penance or mortification to undertake.
Sure.
So some people actually go through that. They feel that because they can't eat food now and that maybe they're not losing weight as rapidly as they would like to, that the world is unfair. And therefore, indeed, that one, the anger can just be underneath the surface. I suppose it's like giving up cigarettes, feeling very proud of that, and then walking around being bitchy all during the Lenten season or the time when one is doing that.
And the greater value, as St. Paul says very clearly, is charity. And that's the reason also, I think, for the changes in the Catholic Church, where you used to have much stricter penances given, the fasting, the abstinence. It was more frequent and spelled out in much greater detail. And that is being diminished to a great extent. And some people would interpret that as a lowering of standards, that we're not as religious as we used to be. But I think the Church in all those pronouncements has clearly said that if we do not eat as much, we are to do other things in a charitable way. And the aim always is a greater measure of charity and compassion. That's what really counts. And if the fasting and the other mortifications help, fine. But there are other ways, too, to achieve that.
I think that many people have sort of picked up that message. What you say, I believe, is true. That is that people see the relaxation of the fasting laws during Lent, for example, and take that as a sign that it really is not important anymore.
Yes.
I think there's many people who think that mortification, renunciation idea is now out, that's passé, old-fashioned, and so on. And I suppose here I'm talking about more enlightened and more liberal people in the Judeo-Christian tradition, but I think that it would be important to see that as tightly connected in with our anthropology, that is, our understanding of ourselves. If it is true that we're threatened by sin and guilt, and part of the temptation of life is to go to excess, and that if we live in an excessive affluence while other people in the world don't have things, and if we're consuming 40% of the resources as 6% of the population here in the United States, then it seems as though renunciation is part of the overall growth in the spiritual life. Not at the expense of charity, but as part of a full understanding of who we are. And I think that we'd probably have to get that back in, but not under the old rigid auspices that we had before, like exactly how much you could eat on a given day, and we think about the old way of how that was measured out, and the arguments about it that we used to go through, and how Catholics would be at parties on Friday night and have to go to Mass the next day or something, where they could eat a hamburger or not. I mean, it was all around midnight. It was all so strange. And while those are nostalgic days, and maybe many of us recall it with some fondness in a way, it's a bonding among people, still it often fell into a legalism that wasn't very much in accord with the gospel. So I guess what we're looking for today is to say, well, what kind of renunciations do I need in my life in order to become a more charitable person? And that might suggest renouncing strange kinds of things. For example, I was talking to someone not long ago who was going to, as their Lenten penance, to renounce working so hard and to bring more play into their day. And so isn't that interesting, that a person would take as their penance to at least get an hour of recreation each day during Lent. Now, under an old ethic, that would seem very strange, but in the light of saying, hey, what do I need in my life to improve, it could be just exactly the proper penance or mortification to be doing.
I think later in another program we're going to talk more about the positive things, but I emphasize them a lot more. This has been a Lent for me. This will sound a little strange, but I'll explain it. A Hindu Lent. I was so impressed by the film Gandhi that on Ash Wednesday I took his scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, and I read them for about 3 hours and have continued to read them. I got a biography of Gandhi. I've begun a little bit of the Upanishads and other of their sacred books. And I guess my feeling was that if this man, using those sources of inspiration, could become such a good person, that it sure couldn't hurt me. And I am Catholic. The word means universal. So I should be open to the Holy Spirit speaking in whatever source. And that was sort of the feeling I had when I read those. And a lot of it dovetails so much with Christianity. I look at Gandhi, who is one of the supreme examples of fasting and using it effectively. I guess one of the things that has struck me most deeply about Gandhi, thinking about him, is how he used that fasting for social justice. It wasn't just a private, personalized kind of religion, but he cared very deeply about other people who were hurting, and the hurting in his own body somehow absorbed their problems and tried to make a better world. And that's the ideal, even from a Christian viewpoint, I think.
Oh, I fully agree with that ability to pass over to other religions, other people, and to see things their way and find our own tradition enriched. I believe that theologically it's very sound that God speaks to us in many ways in our world. His Spirit does surprising things, and the truth percolates up in ways that perhaps we don't expect. So I think that's perfectly proper from a sound theological viewpoint. And I think I like your point about Gandhi's fasting as relating to social justice. And, of course, I think of the time when he just began to fast in order to get a strike settled, and the fast that he used to create greater peace in his own country. Well, and I think that perhaps there's simple ways one could think about that and say, if someone is going to be giving up beer during Lent, then that maybe they could take the money that's saved that way and use it to join Bread for the World to help the hungry in the world, or to to give it to some of the Feed Your Neighbor programs here in the city, so that the money, there would be a direct correlation. So if someone's going to fast and not eat desserts during Lent, that maybe the money saved again could be used in some other way. Perhaps there would be ways in which people renounce many of the affluences, the good things they have, and would use it as a way of getting in solidarity with the poor. Maybe people who would be giving up some recreation on Saturday would join with a group to go visit poor people and be with them and learn from them. Work downtown in one of the soup kitchens or something, where one would not be just there serving, but trying to learn something from the people that one is serving or that one is interacting with. So that what we're trying to do here is to get into a greater solidarity with people whose lifestyle is different from our own.
Well, if you turn to our own sources, the Old Testament and the New Testament, right at the beginning of Lent, every year, from Isaiah chapter 58, this is what we hear, and what you just said explains it in a contemporary way so well. This is the fasting that I wish, says the Lord, releasing those bound unjustly, untying the thongs of the yoke, setting free the oppressed, sharing your bread with the hungry, sheltering the oppressed and the homeless, clothing the naked when you see them, and not turning your back on your own. That is as clear a statement of the social nature of our commitment, our call to love, and also the opposite of it, it's sin.
What was the source there, though?
That's
Isaiah, yes.
Chapter 58. Beautiful reading.
Yes, right. And some of those themes picked up then in Luke's Gospel when Jesus describes his own mission of what he's come to do.
Yes.
Very much in social terms, to free the captives and help those who are hurting in many ways.
All of the liberation movements, that's a little dangerous to say all, but practically all that I know of, in the movement, it seems to me, would dovetail very well with Christianity, and whatever liberates people truly, not, I guess some people use that word, and it's not true liberation, but all of those movements for minority rights, for women's rights, for any kind of person who is oppressed, the anawim that the gospel talks about, the poor, a Christian ought to back those and make whatever effective contribution he or she can to making the world more just and more human and a better place.
You know, that idea of mortification we're talking about would fit in with that liberation theme at a personal level to begin with, because one of the things it seems we want to do in life is to get over our compulsions, to get over our enslavement, to get over the things that keep us from being more fully human. And a lot of times maybe the mortifications can do that. So some person who's sleeping in more than they should in the morning, maybe their discipline is precisely to get up at a set time, to set the alarm and get out of bed right away and get on their knees and say a prayer. And maybe the purpose of that is to get free of an excessive need for sleep or a compulsion to not face the day. Maybe the reason one stays in bed is because one can't face the problems of the day. Or for people to try to be restrained in their language, for example. Maybe parents are thinking that way, that, well, here, you know, I'm really just caught up in this language. I swear too much around the kids, and they hear me talk like this. And maybe that what I ought to do is to restrain that and curb that in a way so that I'm not just in that pattern, almost a slave of that pattern without ever thinking about it. People who are eating too much, people who are drinking too much, smoking too much, maybe using drugs more than they should. People are saying, well, what I need to do is to break out of the confinement of that. So again, one would pick a penance in life that would precisely attack my particular compulsion, my way that I feel I'm enslaved in some way by my passions and so on.
Well, the word mortification has at its root M-O-R-T, from Latin, to die. And we're really talking about dying to ourselves in some sense, but to the selfishness and the less than human parts. And the paradox of the Christian message is that out of death comes life, and out of that mortification can come a person who is more fully alive and a better person. That's the aim of it.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. And if you miss that, you miss what it's all about. We've been talking about Gandhi a little bit, and certainly his renunciations helped him that. He renounced violence, and that a lot of people find that very attractive these days. Other people are turned off by it, of course, but he renounced violence. That helped him to live a more charitable way, achieve social justice. He renounced his sexual relationship with his wife, lived a life of celibacy for many years, and that he thought that freed him up for greater involvement in the social struggles of his time, was renounced food, lived as a vegetarian, and so on. So we see really an example here of a man who renounced in order to achieve, as you suggested.
Yeah. Ultimately, it has a positive side to it. It's not death, but it's life. And it's not taking away, but it's bringing to myself the fullness of my humanity and who I ought to be.
So I guess if a person was going to look at the Lenten season constructively, or at the spiritual life in general, they'd have to say, well, now where is my problem? Where am I living under some enslavement? Where am I not functioning effectively? Whose people's needs am I missing? And what contribution would I like to make to the world? And then to pick a penance that might further that in a way. And a mortification, a renunciation, a giving up something that wouldn't be for its own sake, not in order that I can walk around and say, hey, I'm terrific, I gave up dessert all during Lent, or I haven't smoked now for 6 weeks, or I haven't even had a beer now for the whole 40 days. Not that, but to be able to say, no, I renounce in order to grow. So that is really the Christian paradox, isn't it? That we die to self in order to live to a richer life. And for us, of course, the model of that is Jesus Christ, one who lived a full human life and was ready to give himself entirely in death, and who was raised to life as reward for that kind of obedience and sacrifice.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Father Roland Calvert, Associate Pastor at Pius X Parish in Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was spiritual growth and renunciation. If you have any questions about today's program, or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections, in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio, 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.